Hello, hello, and this week's author spotlight is the same as before, but we've got a new author. So we're going to find out the highs, the lows, and what they'd wish they'd known before they began. So if you're a budding author and you'd like to know the tips, tricks, and trades, or no, that isn't, put my teeth back in, tips and tricks of the trade, that's the word I'm trying to say, that will help make your journey to authorship and publication easier, then please join us live now with any of your questions. Without any further ado, let's welcome Jenny Gordon to the show. Hello, Jenny.
Hello, Cheryl.
It's so lovely to have you here. So tell us a little bit about your journey as an author.
I was writing my first book for about 15 years. And I think what lots of people do is said to people, I'm going to write that. I'm going to put that in a book. And they said, you should put that in a book. And we'd have that conversation and I'm going to write a book. I am going to write a book. I am going to write a book. And then I started writing a book about viruses. And then the pandemic hit. And you don't really want to write a book about viruses in a pandemic when everybody's scared, do you? So I realised that actually I was writing the wrong book, which I think Karen would say is a common mistake. So I was writing the wrong book. So it took me a while to find the right book to write at the right time.
And so, yeah, so let's just clarify. Let's rewind then, and just for the sake of the audience, what kind of virus were you writing about before?
I was writing about the virus of comparisonitis, where you compare yourself with other people and usually find yourself wanting, kind of a different perspective on imposter syndrome, not being good enough, all of those things.
Yeah. And so I know that we met a few years ago on the writing retreat, and so you started off on the journey to write that book, and then when it came to actually publication, we had the pandemic, and it didn't feel appropriate to be talking about contaminations and infections and viruses when everybody was suffering so badly. So that journey of talking about it and saying about writing a book, and then starting that book and that not being the right book for that time, and then developing the book you've written, that journey for you has been like what?
You know me, I love a metaphor, and I thought very hard about this one. And I think it's been like a flock of sheep.
Is there anything else about that flock of sheep?
Well, I used to live in Scotland on the edge of a cliff. And I lived on a farm, and we had a flock of sheep. Well, more than one. Well, a huge flock of sheep. And ideas for me are like sheep. So there's lots of them. Some of them are quite woolly, and they go in all directions. So when they're all together, you think, oh, they're quite neat, but it doesn't take much before they go off in all directions. And obviously the journey, or, you know, your life is a bit like the undulating hills. So my journey to authorship was like having this flock of sheep and trying to kind of guide them in the right direction, keep them all together, with various sheep going off in random directions and worrying about them falling over a cliff.
That reminds me of that video when they said about herding cats. So it sounds like you're trying to herd your ideas into the book and worrying that the things are going off the cliff. So why did you write this book when you've been thinking about what sounds probably like a number of different books, and then there was that book that wasn't the right book, and then there's the book you're writing now? Why did you write this book?
I think the short answer is the world needed it. I felt the world needed to have this book, and that I was in a really good position to write it, because I had spent a lot of time thinking about the right book to write.
So tell us a little bit about the right book to write then.
I don't know, where shall I start? I think that the book is about people reconnecting and reclaiming their individual brilliance. All of us as individuals, I believe, are born brilliant, and stuff happens, life happens along the way, and it's really easy for that brilliance to be buried, knocked out of you, slide out of you.
Yeah.
You know, it's buried. And so this book is a combination of a step-by-step guide and my story back to brilliance.
And so what's been the most important thing that you've learned in writing this book, when you know that the world needs it and that you are in a good position to write it and it's your story? What's the most important thing you've learned about becoming an author?
Knowing your self-awareness, always come back to that. And the thing that I have learned, that the hardest lesson and probably the most important one, is that my natural version of plan isn't enough.
Is there anything else about your natural version of plan?
So when I talk about a plan, it's kind of it's a shape. We're getting back to the sheep now.
I was going to say, is that sort of fluffy sheep again?
Yes. So my idea of a plan was a kind of was an idea. It was a shape. It had a shape. It had form, but some of the detail was missing. And so what I needed to do was go back to that plan and fill in the blanks, because actually those blanks are really, really important. And it was only, I hadn't realized quite how important they were till afterwards.
Yeah. So what worked for you?
Process.
What worked for you to get from those sort of fluffy clouds and ideas down to that sort of plan with the details?
I had the marvelous help of a sheepdog. Karen knows I call her the sheepdog. So I, as you know, enlisted the help of Karen to be my sheepdog, to kind of herd. She's brilliant at letting you talk about all those ideas, and then she herds you very nicely, like one man and his dog, with one sheep in one pen, and she lets you run around the field like a mad thing, and then she just gently guides you where you need to be. So she was absolutely, and if I had listened, if I spoke sheepdog, I'd have heard her idea of plan initially and I'd have listened, but I did it my way first. And she kind of let me do that. And then I had to go back and go, oh, actually, what you said was right.
Yeah. Well, you know that I can relate to that. And I know that you and I have had this conversation before about planning in a way that works for you. And I think there's a really big thing for authors, particularly if you're quite a creative mind and you, like you say, you have lots of ideas. And it does take quite a skill to drill down, doesn't it, to get the detail. And I think if you don't know which book you're writing, that's definitely the first thing, because you haven't got anything to guide your ideas. But having somebody else who, Karen has got this way of just, she can't handle it when there's not that structure in place. Therefore, that's why she'll sort of help cajole, as my word, to get you to do that, because that's what makes it easier for the reader to read it as well.
It also makes it easier for the writer to write it. It was so helpful. And I think what was incredibly useful was she knows the right questions to ask in order to get you to and I'd say, oh, do I have to answer that now? Can I skip on to an easier one? And she's like, no. No, you have to answer this first. It's like, okay. And actually the being able to do that was really helpful.
Fabulous. So one of the most important things then, as you've probably learned from what I'm hearing there, is actually that your thing of plan is not the same as a plan that maybe someone like a book mentor like Karen would recommend. And actually learning to hear sheepdog and do it that way earlier would have made it easier for the writing. So what do you wish you'd known before you started, unless that is the same thing, or is it something different that you wish you'd known before you started?
I thought about this. I think the thing I wish I'd known before I started was that I'm a writer. And I think I didn't know that when I started. And it kind of, I felt a bit like an imposter, hence the other book. But I am. So I think I identify as a writer was something that I've only recently started saying. And I think if I'd started saying that earlier, much earlier, I'd have got out of my own way quicker.
And what happened what happened just before you identified? What was it that worked to get you to that place where you actually did identify as a writer?
It was feedback. It was when I it was really scary, isn't it? The first time that you give your work to a peer reviewer, and then you have to wait till they've read it, and then they come back, and obviously some of them were people who I knew quite well, and they said, "Wow, this is really good," and they sounded well. What I heard was surprise. And they when I said, "Oh, this is surprising," I said, "Oh, you sound surprised," and they said, "Well, actually, no, we're not surprised at all. We're not surprised in the slightest. But you've never shown that jewel before." So that's what made the difference.
So getting the feedback and showing that jewel that you can you write.
And of course, you have to show the jewel to get the feedback, don't you?
Yeah, and that is, as you said before, it's quite scary. I know that it's a vital part of all learning processes, but definitely a vital part of authorship. And I hear too many people talking about their book, as you and I have done for many years. Then they write it, but then they never show it to anybody, because it's almost like while it's in their head, it's still this gorgeous, dreamy thing. And if somebody else sees it, they might not like it as much as they do. But it's actually that feedback that kind of, a bit like your book, that shines the light on it, that ignites it, that makes it even more real and more valuable to both author and the reader. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, question, what was your lowest point as an author?
I think it was both the lowest and the highest, which is kind of, am I allowed to have that? The lowest
your
point,
unique self.
The lowest point was I was listening to Karen on a webinar talking about the 5 most common mistakes that authors make, and that clunking realization when she said, "You're writing the wrong book." And there was just, and I kind of knew it, but to hear it out loud, and it was such a kind of punch, and I thought, oh, that's me. And you have that moment where you think, well, now what do I do? I've invested so much time and energy and, years and years and years in the planning of this book. And it's the wrong one. And so now what do I do? I've got nothing was my initial, I've got nothing. And then I guess in the next kind of moment thinking, well, actually, I haven't got nothing. I've got a clean page. So if that's the wrong book, there must be a right book. So what's the next one? So it was kind of that real low point, and then the of possibility.
Yeah. And can I just, that book, you say it's the wrong book. Is it the wrong book forever, or do you think it was just the wrong book for then? Do you think it is a book you will write eventually? I
think it's number 3 book, because I've started the second one, and it isn't the second one, but it is potentially the third one. Yes.
Right. So it was more of a timing.
It was the timing.
The whole book wasn't right.
It's not the content and there is a little bit of that book in this one. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't the wrong book. It was the wrong book for the time. The timing was wrong.
Yeah. And it's so good that you can know that, though, isn't it? And listen to your own intuition and trust yourself when everything was going on.
And I think timing is so often a thing, isn't it? That, you often think about, and I can't remember, I heard it, I don't know if it was in this forum or a similar forum, where somebody said, how would you feel if if the book you were going to write was then published by somebody else, because you didn't show it, you didn't get yours out, you didn't take that chance and write it. Yeah. So yeah,
I totally get that. And I think there is this journey that we have to go on as an author to identify as the writer. And so everything you've done before, almost that practice run in getting that book out and learning how to do the process of planning, etc., it's all works towards the author that you've become today. And I don't think any of it's wasted.
No, none of it.
And it is that taking the time to tune into yourself. And I think we all write our books in our own pace. But as you can get stuck in that talking about phase. I'm so glad you're out of that part and moving on. So what's been your biggest success to date with this book?
The biggest success is that I've finished it. It's edited. It's ready to go. It's ready to be published. That's the next step. And really, I think for me personally, the kind of feedback and the belief of other people, and finally the kind of interest. So people going, when's it coming? When's it coming? Which is is really exciting.
And you may have forgotten about this, Jewel, already, but didn't you launch a program as a result of writing this book? And didn't you get customers and make money out of writing this book?
Yes, I did. And actually, yes, you're right. So the online program came first. The online program was developed out of COVID and lockdown. It was a lockdown jewel. And yes, the program is still available and will be running again soon. And the book goes is standalone, but also goes hand in hand with that program. So no, I haven't forgotten it. So yes, I haven't
just getting excited about the next step, aren't you? So those of you probably see the book is called The Brilliance of You, and the website is below, genuineconsulting.com, where you can register interest because it's due to be published, and I'm sure we'll get you back on the show again when you have got to that final phase of actually publishing it and got it in your hand.
In my hand.
So tell us a little bit about the book and who's it for. What will they be wanting or needing? Who would this book benefit? Who would benefit from this book is the question I'm trying to say.
Yes. I think this book, well, obviously it's perfect for anybody on the planet. English speaking, because it is written in English. I think it would benefit people who have either had to go through change, had change kind of thrust upon them, whether they liked it or not, who feel that they have been juggling, pleasing lots of other people, but maybe losing themselves along the way. So it's for people who are thinking about making a change, or who've been forced to make a change, and who would like to have a bit of fun and spend a bit of time exploring who they are. So it's self-care, self-awareness, kind of understanding yourself, because actually when you do that, it gives you such power, and I mean power in the best possible way, the power to transform yourself into the person you really are, as opposed to the person the world thinks you should be, or other people think you should be, or your boss thinks you should be.
Yeah. And you have a lovely story, don't you, sort of saying that we're born with brilliance, but it just gets covered up and buried over the years. And this book is about revealing those gems and those jewels that have been there all along, that in the busyness of life and the difficulties perhaps we have gone through, that we forget about them. So without any further ado, if anybody's interested in that book, obviously you can check it out here on the Consultant Journey. In fact, actually, I can do it in the group as well. Let's just pop it in the comments. Let's see if I can do that. Then it'll be there as well. Oh no, I can't. I'll have to do it afterwards. I do not have the technology today. So if there's nothing, is there anything else you want to add before we say goodbye today, and about the book, or anything, tips to any other authors that are listening in right now?
I think the tip to any author is you are one. If you think, it's the old Henry Ford. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're absolutely right. So my invitation would be there's no better time than now to have a go.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, and look forward to finding out what happens next. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.
So that's the end of this episode of the Author Spotlight. And as always, I just want to ask you to think about, if you are looking to turn your dreams into reality this year, then please reach out and get the support you need. As you heard from Jenny today, having someone that could just cajole your ideas into that plan could be all the resource and support you need. So please reach out, don't struggle alone, and we'll see you again on the next episode.